I've had this thought on my mind because the fact that you hear so much, being said out there, whether it be on the news, and I really do not watch the news at all, but I hear a lot at work, and the thought is that you always need to be afraid, right? And I'm sorry, maybe you guys feel this way, but I cannot be afraid to walk out my door. No. That every time I walk out my door, something horrible is going to happen to me. And that's kind of the mentality that a lot of people have taken on, that I can't even go out of my house because I'm going to get sick, or I can't go out of my house because this is going to happen. And I'm like, Lord, I can't think like that. I can't live like that. It's not healthy. And before all of this happened, how many of us really thought like that, right? I mean, unless you're like really a clean freak or OCD about things, and you're like, I got to wash my hands every time I shake somebody's hand, right? But I don't think most of us felt that way beforehand, right? And so I've just had this thought that I can't be afraid, right? And that I'm in the hands of the Lord. I'm in His hand. I can't get out of His hand. And He keeps me by His Spirit, right? And so this has been my thought. And so I've kind of been thinking a lot about the hand over the last year or whatever. And so I've looked up a lot of different scriptures, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight, is the hand. So, okay. So this is the thought that comes to my mind. So we're not going to be afraid because we're in His hand, because the one who created it all, right? He holds all things, and that includes us, right? In Colossians 1:17, it says, He existed before anything was made, and now everything finds completion in Him. That's a comforting thought. Why do we think that we can even take one breath? We can't even take one step. We can't do anything without Him. If He wasn't there or here or wherever we want to say that He is, we wouldn't be. We'd be a poof, we'd be a vapor, we'd be nothing. Because He holds us in His hands. We consist because of Him. The Message says it this way: He was there before any of them came into existence and holds it all together right up to this moment. You think about everything that you know. You think about the shirt you wear. If it wasn't for Him, that wouldn't be, right? You wouldn't have cells in your body because He holds them together, right? You wouldn't have the grass. Nothing in this earth would there be anything without Him. He holds it all together. So how many of you guys were here many years ago when we watched the video, How Great Is Our God by Lou Giglio? Does anybody remember that? Awesome video. We should watch it again sometime. It was like a 2-hour video, but it was awesome because if you remember, he had us take a golf ball. You remember that? We all came in with our golf balls, and he had us bring a little tiny pin, right? And we were supposed to put a dot somewhere on that golf ball. And that was us in the earth, right? And then he talked about these golf balls, right? And how there was like 250,000 of these Earths in some of the galaxies or solar systems. And I'm so concerned about me because I'm just this little tiny dot on this little golf ball that there's 250,000 of them in these galaxies, and the galaxies continue to go and go and go. And yet I'm so worried, God, are you going to take care of me? I mean, He is so much bigger than we can even comprehend. And He's holding us all together, right? So again, He created and He keeps them by His very existence. Just by being, everything is. So in the King James Version, this Colossians 1:17, it says, He is before all things, and by Him all things consist. Now, that word consist means to place together, to set in the same place, to bring or band together, and to set one with another. To put together, unite parts into a whole. Now, the word is sunesteo, and in my thinking, it kind of sounds like the word sustain, right? And He sustains us. I mean, we think about food crops sustaining, right? But He sustains us. There's that consistency, right? But then He also says to bring or band together, and this is that it adds this definition to it, to band together. Now, what does that sound like? You remember? Remember when Pastor talked about the bands, the cords, the threefold cord, that it couldn't even easily be broken, and how he put the three pieces of wood together and he tried to break them and he couldn't break them because the fact that they were banded together and they were strong, right? So do you think there's really a difference to be band or to be bound, right? There's that banding, bonding, bounding. He's consistency, the sustaining, he's holding us together, right? So the question is, and Pastor gave us the answer, but what are we bound to? Anybody? Bound to one another. That's right. So the thing is, and you guys probably are not like me at all, but sometimes I kick against that thing that God has bound me to. Nobody's like that, right? I mean, why do I do that? Because what, I think that I'm smarter than God and he doesn't know what he's doing, right? So we're gonna kick against it and fight against it because we obviously know best, right? I mean, that's what we must really think, right? I mean, do you guys do that? I mean, if you're honest, you'd probably say yes. But every time that I squirm, kick, maybe I don't say it with my mouth, right? But the thought is there, right? I don't like that thing that you set me next to, right? I don't like it because it doesn't look right, it doesn't smell right, it doesn't feel right, it doesn't make me happy, right? But God said, I bound you to that for a purpose. So who am I to say something like that to God, right? Because we can't be bound to each other, right, if it wasn't for him binding us all together. Because, see, he's like skin, right? What does skin do? It kind of holds it all in, right? It covers everything. So, and it does a really good job of it until there's a sore, right? And you think about what a sore is, right? It's painful, it's ouch, creates infections sometimes, but let's call it this, because this is what we call it in medicine. We call it a wound, right? So this wound sometimes happens because it's self-inflicted, right? I mean, we do things, we trip, we fall, fall off a bike, whatever, scrape our knee, or sometimes it's, on purpose, we do stupid things and, whatever. That just wounds come up, right? But then there's also wounds that come by pressure, right? And a lot of times the wounds that we see are actually from pressure and maybe not by accident or inflicted. How many ladies have ever sat down on your chair and crossed your legs? Anybody? Anybody ever do that? Yes. And when you uncross your legs, what do you see? Lines or a red mark, right? Right here on the back of my leg, I always get a red mark. That is the beginning of a wound. If I kept that there for very long, then pretty soon that would start to break down because it's pressure, right? Let's see here. So I'm just going to kind of go off on a little bit of a rabbit trail here. So pressure, in Matthew 13:1, it talks about the sower and the seed, right? You guys have all heard the story, right? And it's a crazy thought because the seed that falls on rocky ground, what does it do? It doesn't go down deep, right? It withers away pretty quickly, right? And it says when the tribulation or the pressure comes because of the word, immediately it stumbles and falls away. I mean, you think about a wound, causing one to stumble and fall, right? So if we don't have the word taking root in our lives, we will stumble with the pressure. We will develop a sore because of the pressure. This is if we don't allow the word to take root in our lives, right? So staying in a position too long and not moving, the skin starts to take a beating, right? And then it starts to break down. Those parts that have pressure on them for too long, at first they will get sore, right? They do. They start to get a little sore, and they get a little red, and then they get angry, right? And then they get to the point where they don't feel anything anymore. Kind of just starts to get numb, right? You don't feel it, and then you don't really necessarily think about it because you don't feel it. But then when you don't feel it, then it starts to break down. So when the wound starts, right, it requires some attention. If it's a little wound, a little pressure, it's not so bad. But when that wound gets to be a little worse, it's going to require a lot of attention. And it's going to need a nurse, the healer, the Holy Ghost, to come in and do a little work. You have to get the pressure off. You got to keep the pressure off, or else it's going to develop into a big sore. Sores, let me tell you something, they're really nasty and they get really infected really badly. We don't have any nurses in here, but maybe some projective nurses, right? But let me tell you, I worked in wound care in North Carolina for a couple of years. When I would work on the weekends, I'd work in wound care. That was part of our department. So we got to go in and clean out all the nasty wounds. And I had this lady there, and she was elderly. I don't know how old she was. She was elderly, and she had a wound on this hip, and on this hip, and right back here. She was frail and thin. She didn't have near enough nutrition, and she would die before those wounds ever healed because she could never get the pressure off. You think about it, where would she lay? She'd have to lay on her belly. But elderly people don't they hardly ever lay on their bellies. And that would be the only way to get the pressure off. So if you don't heal the wounds, they get infected, and if you don't get them taken care of, you'll die. So if the wounds get deep, right, you have to go to a different level, right? Now in the natural, we do all kinds of things to get that part to heal, right? So we'll add medicine, right? Maybe a little triple antibiotic ointments, add a lot of protein to the diet, right? Bandages to help keep out the infection. Sometimes surgically they'll go in and put a skin flap over something if there's a wound there, and hopefully it will heal, hopefully. But sometimes that wound never heals, and then they have to amputate. Isn't that a horrible thought? We're talking about the body. Can you imagine getting a sore so badly somewhere that they had to take a part of your body off? That's a really horrible thought. And yet I'm talking about the body. Can you imagine having someone in your body getting so much pressure that they couldn't handle, that they had to be amputated? That's a really horrible thought. So when the body gets so broken down and does not heal, it will be removed because it won't heal, and it puts the rest of the body in harm's way. Let me tell you something. I had a patient, they had to have their foot removed, because the fact that they had a wound on their toe, happens all the time, But the thing is, if he didn't have it removed, then he'd end up having gangrene and dying, So it causes problems if you keep the part that is infected or it has a sore that won't heal. It has to go, and it's a horrible thing to lose that part. But sometimes it's got to go. So sometimes it's got to go. So it's a terrible thought to lose a body part, especially one that God has bound us to, right? He wants us to be satisfied there where he's put us. I don't want to see any of my body parts to have to be removed because of a wound. I just don't want to see it. And if it does, and then the thing is, to stop a wound from starting, you got to have nutrition, right? That's really the best way. You have to be well nourished to keep wounds from starting. And if you have one that can't or won't get enough nutrition, then it will end up getting a wound and getting too sore. So our nutrition comes in when our roots go deep, right down to the foundation. All right, that's going to be the foundation for us. When our foundation is secure, it strengthens the rest of the building, right? So, all right, so that was a big rabbit trail. So the skin, the Holy Ghost, right? Keeping us all together, just like the hand, he holds us, right? So the hand, when Brother Ed was speaking quite a while ago, he talked about Abraham taking the fire in his hand, and it's just one of those thoughts, ooh, that's kind of interesting. I wonder what that really means and what that looks like. So it's kind of how I started this trail on looking at the hand a little bit. So Abraham, he took the torch, right? And him being a type and shadow, he's in the process of getting ready to sacrifice his son, right? Yay, that's a happy thought, right? So he took the fire in his hand. And have you ever thought about this? How would they keep that fire going? It was going to be a 3-day journey, at least, right? They had to prepare, right? You had to take the fire. Now, it talks about a torch, taking the torch in the hand. So you think about what it's going to take to keep that torch going for 3 days. Now I kind of did Lord, how long does this torch last? I don't know, I think about a piece of wood with a fire going on it. How long does it last for? And they said about 20 minutes. So can you imagine 20 minutes over a 3-day period, how many times they'd have to refresh that? Or, how many, I don't know. I don't know. I didn't really research it out enough to see what kind of torch this was, but how many pieces of cloth did they have to take that was dipped in oil that would keep this fire burning for 20 minutes over a 3-day period? And you think about it. It was 3 days they had to eat. I'm assuming they would have taken food to eat, right? Because you get hungry, you get tired, they'd stop and rest, they'd sleep overnight, because I don't think you're really going to travel that much at night in the dark in the wilderness, right? So they had to be prepared to have enough stuff with them to keep that fire going as they went to sacrifice, right? So I also I wanted to see, is this really just a torch? Or what is this? So I looked at several different translations, and one translation, the Living Translation, said it would take, or that they would use a flint, So to me, that means that you can go and start the fire somewhere, But that would also take some preparation, because they would have had to learn how to use that flint, which would probably been done from their childhood, right? They would have started to learn to use flints and things like that. I think about me out by the fire, or a stick, a bunch of branches with like some leaves or something, and trying to blow on it and do this. It would take me hours probably to even get a half a breath of smoke coming out, But for them, they would have been very skilled and trained in that. But again, that would also take some time and sacrifice to get that skill set going as well. So either way you look at it, it's going to take some preparation, right? Let's see here. Okay, so that was Abraham going to sacrifice Isaac. So it took some time for Abraham. When God prepared a sacrifice, it took a little time, right? He didn't just do it like that. Okay, so the next story of the hand in Exodus 4:6. So God was speaking to Moses. Now, God told Moses, I want you to go to Egypt, set my people free, take them out to the wilderness and sacrifice for 3 days, right? And Moses was kind of like, I don't know, God. I don't really know about this. And God said, what did God tell him to do? As a witness to him that God was telling him to do it. You guys remember? Told him to take his staff, throw it down, right? But he also told him to do another thing. He said, take your hand and put it in your cloak, right? And then pull it back out, and it was leprous, right? And then he said, okay, now stick it back in. He put it in, he brings it out, and it's clean, right? So why is that story important? Why are we talking about, here, Moses, I'm going to show you something. To me, throwing a stick on the ground and having it turn into a snake and then grabbing it by the tail and turning it back to a stick, that would have probably been enough, because I'd be like, that's enough. I don't need any more signs, Lord. I don't want any more snakes coming out of anywhere, right? But he said, okay, so maybe there was a story, maybe there was a thought behind it, your hand talking about your strength, right? And you're putting it into your bosom, right? It's going after your own strength, maybe. That look, Pharaoh, I'll show you the leprous hand. If you want to go after your own strength, I'll show you what I can do. It wasn't just a shock and awe, and it wasn't a magic trick, right? And the Bible says that God said, if he doesn't believe it, then all the plagues of Egypt will come. Well, obviously we know what happened, right? He didn't believe it. He's like, I don't care what you do. It's like a magic trick to me, but God is not about magic. Okay, third story of the hand. So remember when Elijah was praying for rain? And we all know the story. We've heard it 1,000 times, right? He tells his servant, go and look for rain, and the servant comes back, and on the 7th time he came back and he said, I see a cloud the size of a man's hand, right? That doesn't seem like much. It's pretty insignificant, right? The size of a man's hand. A man's hand is probably bigger than mine, but, far off in the distance. And he said, boy, you better run. It's going to rain, right? There was something that he'd seen in it, right? So he had been through some stuff to get there. Elijah had been, remember? He said, there's not going to be any rain, not until I tell it to rain again. And you have Ahab and Jezebel, they're chasing him, right? And after 3 years, God says, I want you to go back. And he's like, God, you better do what you say you're going to do, because in fact, they're going to kill me if not, because it's been a drought, right? And he had been on the run from this wicked woman for 3 years. And now God's telling him, go and sacrifice. Remember the story? After he said, it's going to rain, right? After they had, or they set up the Isles of Baal, right? Or the tower, whatever. And he said, pour all the water on it. After it had been in a drought, pour more water. And then he called out to God, and he, came down and smote the sacrifice, right? But God told him to go and sacrifice. He'd been through some stuff to get there. 3 years. Can you imagine being on the run for 3 years? That's some stuff, right? Abraham had been through some stuff to get there, to get that fire in his hand, right? He had waited a lifetime to get Isaac. You think about it. You guys felt like you waited a long time to get Sam, right? And you did. That was a long time by our standards. But he had waited a lot longer, a long time to get Isaac, and now God tells him to go sacrifice. That's some stuff, right? Moses had been through some stuff before he got to not just see it, but experience the leprous hand. Remember, he killed an Egyptian, and he ran away for 40 years. 40 years, and then God's telling him to go back and sacrifice, right? That's some stuff, right? Okay, next story of the hand. We're getting into the New Testament a little bit. In Matthew 12:9, so Jesus is going into the synagogue, and there's a man there with a withered hand. You guys remember the story? And they, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they're like, what is it? Is it right to heal on the Sabbath day? Can you imagine this story playing out? Jesus is there, and there's this man with this withered hand. And he's like, I've heard the stories. I know he can heal me, but will he do it because it's the wrong thing to do? Can you imagine? Will you do it for me, Lord, even though they're telling you? Now, Jesus, he was like, I don't care about what the law says, because I'm here to fulfill the law, right? But I can imagine what this man was like. Will you heal me? And he reached, and then Jesus, of course, said, yes, stretch out your hand, I'll heal you, right? It wasn't a trick. He knew it was possible, right? So this is always the desire of the Father, right? To restore us to the original. Jesus restored that man's hand to the original. It was no longer withered or dry. And when I say original, I am not talking about Adam. God doesn't want to restore us back to Adam. He wants to restore us back to himself. He's the original. He's the originator. That's where he wants to restore us to. So, interesting thought. The withered hand. Can you imagine what it looks like? Think about it, what you would think of a withered hand, right? I kind of think of like something like this, small, right? Not able to move, maybe curled up, right? Shrunk in size because the muscles wasted away. But the actual meaning of the word is to be dry. Kind of makes sense, right? Whether do you think about grapes withering on the vine, or our tomatoes look really bad, everything looks dry and dead, right? So it's like the vessels of the hand stopped giving what it needed, right? Remember the wound? Not much different. When a vessel stops working, right, a problem develops and blood flow stops. Nerves stop working, muscles stop working, all parts of the body, right? Connected to this hand, and it withers up. God desires to cause the body of that part to work again, right? To bring it back to the original. We're no different in this body, right? When we're withered, right? God wants to restore us back to the original, back to the Father, H1. That's where he always wants us to be. So crazy thing is, this is not the only withered hand story in the Bible. You guys know where the other one's at? There's probably actually a couple, but this is one that. So in Kings, there was a prophet that went to King Jeroboam. And the word of the Lord came, and he gave it to King Jeroboam, and God told the prophet, go, and when you leave, go home a different way. Don't stay for any reason. Go home, right? But go a different way than what you came. So he went to give the King Jeroboam the word, and it was not a happy word, right? So the king stretched out his hand to go get him, do whatever, and his hand withered. So, that's like, whoa, what did I just do, right? And so he begged the prophet, please pray for me so that my hand will be restored. And so he did, and God restored the hand. God's very merciful. But the thing is, the prophet goes on home. He goes a different way. And so as he's going, the story of him spread. It's amazing how, good news travels fast, right? So as the prophet goes, this older prophet heard the news, right? And he said, you go tell that prophet that God told him to come to my house. And so the young prophet went to his house and he said, why did you come? God didn't tell you to come here. He told you to go home. He says, and you're going to be destroyed. And so on his way home, he got killed by a lion. How would you like that to be your end? Here you trusted God to go give the king a bad word, right? Trusted that God was going to keep you in the midst of this word that you're giving him. And then you pray for that same king to get his withered hand restored. You had enough belief to do that, but then you go and some old prophet tells you to come and you go because it was an older prophet. And so, well, he must know what he's talking about like I don't, right? How would you like that to be your end? But how many of us do that, right? We trust God for certain things, but we back out before the end of it comes to fruition. It's really true. All right, so then you get to Jesus, right? Right? The holes, the scars in his hands, they didn't just show up there. How many of you guys have watched Passion of the Christ? Isn't that a devastating movie? I mean, it's horrible, right? And I think about how horrible that was in that movie, and that probably wasn't even the half of it. Getting his skin ripped and the holes, the whole 9 yards. It's like, it's horrible. And he went through some stuff to be at the right hand of the Father. And he was the sacrifice. He didn't have to sacrifice something else. He was the sacrifice. He went through some stuff. So all the time being in the hand of the Father, sometimes, maybe most of the time, we go through some stuff before we really see that we're in the hand of the Father. Sometimes we can't even see it. We're right there, but it's like we can't see the forest through the trees, right? There's always a sacrifice of preparation, and the important things come by sacrifice. So the hand, such a great part of the body. With it, we grasp and release, right? We can turn and pinch. With it, we lift what? Holy hands to the Lord, right? In 1 Chronicles 16:7, it talks about David delivering a psalm to Asaph to thank the Lord, right? And that word thank is translated to throw, all right? Throwing, to shoot, shooting, to cast, to shoot arrows, to cast down, to throw down, to give thanks, laud praise, to confess, to give thanks, especially to revere or worship with extended hands. Not a closed hand, right? But extended hands. All these things are done with hands. And this is the word thank, right? So why do we lift our hands? It's a surrenderance, right? It's 1 Timothy 2:8 says, holy hands lifted without frustration or strife, right? Clean hands, pure heart, right? I mean, I really like that, without frustration or strife. God, I'm coming to you. I need you, right? I'm surrendering to you. I'm not upset. I'm not angry. I might be broken, but I need you, right? We aren't shaking our fist at God, right? It's open hands to give and to receive, right? Saying, Lord, I need you. I will, and really honestly, when we're worshiping, and I do this, I don't know if you guys do it, I'm worshiping, praising, then pretty soon the parade is going by, right? Am I the only one? I'm looking up at the chandeliers, oh, there's cobwebs, we need to get right? Because you just get distracted, and I'm like, Lord, why am I distracted? I'm here to worship you, right? And what I'm really saying when I'm doing this and getting focused is, Lord, I'm giving you my thoughts, my concerns, my problems, ready to receive your best for me, right? It's really a sacrifice to say that. It's really a sacrifice to say that. Because let's face it, we've all been in situations where we're like, what's his best for me? right? Because I don't always see him answer the way I want to answer, the way I want to see him answer. I know what your word says, Lord. I prayed for this one and you didn't answer me the way that I thought you should, right? And so we have this like back history in the back of our brain, right? And we know what the word says. The word says he's working out all things for good to them that love him and are called according to his purpose. But then you hear people say, well, it's his good, right? But since when is his good not our good? It doesn't matter what it turns out like. God's using it for good. His good is my good. It doesn't matter if it hurts. It doesn't matter if it stinks. It doesn't matter what it looks like. His good is my good. Okay, next hand. 1 Timothy 4:14 talks about the laying on of hands, right? Now, whether it be in presbytery or laying hands on the sick, we use the hand, right? Because there's an impartation, right? The hand's the setting forth of power and authority. If you think about it, okay, what did Brother Nikita say? What? Don't you know that you're what? The temple of the Holy Ghost? Well, if we believe that God lives inside of us and we lay hands, we're imparting that which God is in us. There's power and authority. If we believe God has put himself in us, yes, we are the temple of the Holy Ghost. Yes, we have the power of the Holy Ghost. We just have to believe, right? So I guess sometimes it's an error and we don't believe, right? Okay, next one. Then we get into Galatians 2:9. Paul talks about the right hand of fellowship. Now, right hand talks about place of honor and authority, right? And it means to take up and receive and to take into one's family, right? So he says, come on, take my hand, come with me, right? Will you marry me? Put a ring on the finger, right? He says, come into my family. I want you to marry me. Marry my family, be part of my family, right? How many have done that? How many have gotten married? Right? Now, when we did that, that was exciting, right? We're getting married. How exciting. We're going to have a family, right? But how many of you guys know, in 22 years of marriage, there are a lot of times that Tim has had to do a lot of stuff that he didn't want to do, right? You get married and there is a sacrifice, right? God says, come into the family, right? Marry me, come be part of me. And there is some sacrifice that we have to do because we have to give up some of our ways, right? We have to give up some of our thoughts and take on his thoughts. And sometimes I get the opportunity to do things that I don't want to do. And there's going to be things in God. There's going to be times my flesh is going to say, I don't want to do that, right? But that's why it's a sacrifice to be part of something, to see the hand of God move, to see that you're in his hand, because there's purpose, right? Okay, then we get to Galatians 3:19, and we get the hand of the mediator. Now, in this story here, it's talking about Moses being a mediator between God and Israel, right? But I like the definition of it because it says, by the help or agency of anyone, by means of anyone. Okay, easy enough. But the second one, it says, God symbolizing his might, activity, and power in creating the universe, in upholding and preserving, which is God is present, protecting, and aiding one, and determining and controlling the destinies of men. I like that, right? Because you're talking about God here, controlling the destinies of men, right? I'm glad he's in control of mine, that nobody else is in control because he's good, right? So this is all in the hand. So we have the hand of God, who's the creator of earth. By him we consist, exist, and are bound together. The hand that holds the fire, right? It's the preparation for sacrifice. The withered hand, being in a state of lack, but seeing a miracle, back to restoration. The leprous hand being in the state of disease, but yet seeing another miracle, back to restoration. The cloud the size of a man's hand, seeing something go from drought, a withered and dry and parched place, to wet and flourishing, right? Think about that withered hand, but thinking about a wet and luscious land, right? It's not a desert anymore. Always back to restoration. The extended hand, with it we give worship, giving our all. It's his anyways, right? Then we got the nail-scarred hands, right? A sacrifice to bring restoration. We've got the hand of authority and power, because now his sacrifice, we can walk in that authority, being an extension of his hand. We have a whole lot of power, guys. We just don't recognize it. We have a lot inside of us. We just don't recognize it. It's a gift. God has given himself in us. All right, we got the hand of fellowship, receiving into one's family. I'm telling you guys, that's a really awesome thought. You are welcome into the beloved, right? Welcome into to me, that's awesome. I remember when we first moved here, Pastor, because I'd been sick, just like every other week, I had like a nasty cold, and I'm just like, God, what is this? And I remember Pastor saying, you are welcome into the beloved. And I'm like, okay, what's that supposed to mean about me being sick here, right? But it's kind of funny, because now I say, Pastor told me I was welcome into the beloved, and I sleep well because I know I'm his beloved. But the thing is that I think it was just that acknowledging, like, Sandra, God has called you into this family. You are welcome in here. Okay, then we get to the hand of the mediator, which brings us right back to our beginning, right, which is God. And his hand, being in his hand. So let's think about the hand for just a minute. When you look at the hand, right, an open hand, because we know this, God's hand is not closed towards his people, it's open, right? So you might look at it, I understand God is a spirit, but just like he has an eye and he has a mouth, he has a hand, all right? You can imagine the creases in his hand, right? The marks, the lines, just like we have them, right? So, and he says to cast your cares on him, right? Because he cares for us. And literally, he has everything in his hand. He's so big. He's got it all the galaxies, all the stars. And we're so worried about our little situations, right? To us, they're so huge, but to him, they're nothing. They're no big deal. So how big his hand is, the world seems so very big to me. You think about the earth, and it's like, I just think about living in Belchertown, one person out of like 15,000 or whatever. That's like a drop in the bucket, right? But you think about it, the whole world is so big. You think about you can fly from one end to the other and how many hours it takes you, and he's there, right? He's just so big. So in my world, because it's so big to me, I'm thinking about my life, my kids, my job, my church, you name it, it's there, right? And they're so overwhelming because they're usually right in my face. Situations come up and it's just like, right there, this is all I see, right? But when I think about it being in his hand, my life, and how it can be absorbed in just one little small crevice of his hand, that situation becomes really small. Like, God, you got this. You can handle it. So as I think about these creases and wrinkles and how our worlds fall right into it, I begin to think about something that they do in modern day. You guys know, ever been to a palm reader? I haven't. I don't expect any of you guys have. But they have them out there, right? And I don't really understand what they do with palm reading, but I do know that they do something. I don't know. They look at the lines in the hands, and I guess each line is supposed to represent something, right? But here's a thought. They're telling or reading the future by the creases in your hand, right? But you know what's really awesome? Is he holds my future in the crease of his hand. I don't have to worry. I don't have to be concerned. Those thoughts, those circumstances, that right here in my brain and my eyeballs, it's all I can see. I've got so much stuff going on here and here. It's all I can see. I can't even hardly think sometimes. And God's saying, it's in my hand. Let it go, right? And then he says again, cast your cares on me, for I care for you. And Peter, here's another one for you. Psalms 55:22. It says, cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you and will uphold you. That word sustain, remember? It sounds kind of like sustain, susteno, consist. He will sustain you. He holds it all together, right? He will never allow the righteous to be shaken, to slip, fall, or fail. That's a really nice thought, right? That the word kind of sounds like that consistency that we were talking about earlier. If we can ever get our mind wrapped around it, right? I mean, we wouldn't ever have a concern, ever. If you ever think about it, I mean, it's really easy to say it. It's really hard to do it, right? To think, in the midst of this situation, all I can see is this. And God's saying, I got this. I really got it in my hand. So it sets me free and I don't have to worry, right? My future is not written in the palm of my hand. It's written and held together in the palm of his. So that's all.